Hey guys, how's it going? It's your boy M.K.S here, back with another video. About an hour or just over an hour later than planned, but here I am. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it, especially fans of Italian football and football generally, but in particular Roma fans. And here are some of the people, corporations, organisations and whatnot, who I would love to invest in Roma. And I hope that the club can get, just as I said in part one, I dream that the club can get, I dream and hope that the club can get as much investment as possible, legally being most importantly. Can't really think of much to say for the intro, but I'm going to crack on with the list part two of the list from ideas or points or thoughts number 11 to 20. And as ever, I'd love to know what you think. Just one thing I wanted to say before I start the video is I'd love for people to vote on a potential nickname or your favorite nickname, or both preferably, your favorite nickname and a potential nickname or potential nicknames even for the club. And any facts or information you know about the club, please post up in the comments of these videos. Anyway, here goes. So number 11, I know I touched on this in part one, but I dream that the club will be able to lobby FIFA, UEFA, and whatever lawmakers or decision makers they need to enable the club to get all possible funding. Again, as I often say, legally, most importantly. Preferably as legally and ethically as possible, and to change any rules and or laws on, like say, multi-club ownership, or whatever other rules and laws they might have to bypass, and obviously for the club to make itself attractable to potential investors, which I hope to come to. I suppose I could have said point number one, as they say, looking at number one or whatever, but I suppose this is kind of the opposite in a way, kind of, but maybe not, but maybe this is rather fitting. But in point number one, I could have said about how if I could, I would invest my own personal money into Roma, or even donate to the club if I could. I'm not sure what percentage, but depending on how much money I had, like if I had billions or even trillions of pounds, I might dream I would. I'm not that materialistic, so instead of having mansions, cars, and things like that, I would donate to football clubs, especially Roma, as well as other Italian clubs and Celtic. Sure there was a point I was going to mention, but I can't quite remember it, so I'm going to move on. Number 12, so as I say, I hope that they'll continue to get investment and be able to look at ways to get past FFP rules, look at the best possible legal team. That's another group that could perhaps invest in Roma, and they could perhaps, or maybe the club invest in a legal team as well. But if legal teams or law firms basically are invested into a club from around the world, then hopefully that will mean that they will have an interest even in supporting Roma legally. But maybe there's just a polite way they could talk with FIFA and UEFA about, they could talk to FIFA and UEFA, in better English, they could talk to FIFA and UEFA about getting, politely, about getting more investment and how they can be able to spend it and reinvest it, bringing in the best possible players and things like that. As I mentioned recently, I look for Roma to be as successful as possible, and one of my dreams is for them to win as many Champions Leagues and World Club Cups in the future as possible, as soon as possible and as often as possible, and become the most successful club it can be and bring in the best possible players. And again, I mentioned recently like how I would love it to be like a sticker collection where you collect the best possible players. I think Premier League probably has its own version, but also like Panini has a version of sticker collection of footballers, and I would love for Roma to be like a real life version of that, where they could bring in the best possible players from all around the world. And again, I mentioned that that's a bit of a dilemma with giving young people a chance. I think they should always have as many young people as they're able to have on the bench, and maybe also buy some of the best young players. But I also hope they'll somehow be able to do that whilst also developing good young Italian players for the national team, for that club and country as well. So yeah, as much legal investment as possible, and hopefully they'll invest in academies, in football pitches, stadia, academies and things like that, especially for younger people, and opportunities for young people in Rome and across Italy to play football. One controversial idea, I think this is what I was going to mention in point number 11, because I often think of 11 as like changes and things like that. And again, I know this is something I did mention about a week or so ago, but I wonder what people think about the idea. Maybe I'll ask that as a question in part 3 or part 4. But I wonder what people think of the idea of a controversial idea. But if they knock down, I know many of my ideas are, I suppose, or nowadays probably every idea is controversial potentially. But what if they knock down like the Colosseum? They had like pictures and recordings of the Colosseum to sort of keep the memory alive. But what if they knocked that down and built it into a football pitch? So football could be, or soccer for any Americans out there, or calcio, as it's called in Italy, could be the modern day equivalent of the gladiators, perhaps. Not as brutal, of course, but or nowhere near as brutal. But yeah, I wonder what people think about that idea. Do they think that's a bit too far, or do you think it's too important to knock down? Me, as a fan of just of Italy, but only for football, I think that would be pretty cool if they somehow managed to knock down or to utilize as many buildings as they could to build football pitches and opportunities, again, soccer, calcio, footy, whatever you want to call it, for young people from across Italy, including obviously from Rome, and people from all over the country could come to play there, and that kind of thing. So I'd love for Italy to use as much of its space as possible to develop football teams and include migrants and things like that. Number 13, I would love for the Vatican, the Rothschild Investment Bank and the Rockefellers investment funds, asset management funds, as well as like the Vatican and Catholic organisations to invest in the club, and maybe even allow help people to get into football and utilise some of the land they have as well, and to invest in football pitches and things like that, stadiums, academies and whatnot, and again help the club to buy better players as well, buy the best possible players. And so I think with my patterns, I was thinking of like Rockefeller Investment Fund for Roma, for being the fourth in the sentence, and Rothschild Investment Bank for Roma, and that kind of thing. So but yeah, Catholics to invest in Roma as well and things like that in the club, maybe. Maybe I'm being naive, I don't know, but I think that would be quite interesting. Number 14, as I often say as well, sorry, I do repeat myself a lot, I know, but with great power comes great responsibility, as the saying goes. So I wonder if, I hope that the club will rather do a lot of good for good causes and things like that. So the investment they get, hopefully, maybe that's one way they could bypass the FFP rules and things like that, work with FIFA and UEFA and say, we'll develop the image of football, we'll improve the image of football, tackle corruption, and see how football can be used to tackle crime, corruption, and things like that, not just in football itself, but in the wider society, tackle hooliganism by giving young people, or people generally, especially young people, things to do and places to go, and things like that. Number 15, I would love for there to be as many spaces and places for sport, or places and spaces for playing and practicing football, in this case, especially football, or just football in Italy, as much as possible. And again, I'd love for the club to get as much investment as possible so they can buy the best possible players, and have a balance somehow of youth development. I'm not sure what the rules are. Maybe someone can enlighten me on this, and how many players you're allowed in a squad. Because the reason why I mention that is because I'm thinking, like, I'd love for Roma to get. Another thing I was going to say is I would love for Roma to be like. I mentioned the Panini stickers, or people collecting stickers of the best footballers and things like that. But Roma to be able to do that in real life is one of my main dreams. But also like video games, games consoles, shows my age here, but games consoles, video games as my dad would call them, where you can like buy players. So the more prize money you win, you can buy players with that money. I'd love for Roma to do that in real life and bring in the best possible players in all possible positions. So basically, as I say, being like the Galacticos, but also having the best possible goalkeeper and goalkeepers even, and defenders. So it's a bit of a dilemma, because like, how do they do that and still give young people a chance whilst having the best possible players? Because if they had those players on the bench as well, like 2 or 3 of the best players in the world in each possible position, it would be hard to see how they could get the youth in. But maybe they could, like, especially in friendlies, give young people opportunities, and also the younger people could learn from the older players, so they could have opportunities to be coached by some of the best players in the world as well, in like training games, and hopefully learn a lot from them. So I hope that will still help Roma and Italy to develop Rome itself and Italy, or Rome and the club, both or whatever, to Roma as a city and Roma as a club and the national team to develop good young players. Number 16, I'd love to know other people's ideas about how to attract investment for Roma. I'd love for Roma fans to talk about what ideas you might have for attracting investment, and I'd love for there to be committees, think tanks, brainstorms, networks, cooperatives, whatever you call them, where people openly exchange ideas, and hopefully the best ideas will will come to the front, will come to fruition, and that kind of thing. So hopefully the club can try out different ideas and see which ones work best, and they might be surprised with some ideas that might not seem that great, but they might well be. Number 17, I often think of imagine ifs and things like that, and I just imagine if Roma did get all that investment from like the Rothschild investment banks for Roma, Rockefeller investment funds for Roma, and the Vatican, and all possible corporations that begin with R, companies, businesses, investors, organizations, associations, and even Russia, if they were able to, if Italy could remain neutral politically, just like the Swiss, as I mentioned in part one, it would be interesting to imagine what they could do with so much investment from all around the world, from Arabian and Asian and African and Latin American support as an investment as well. And I was thinking like AS Roma could stand for Arabs to support Roma, Asians to support Roma, and Africans to support Roma, which could be like a part of a marketing campaign to try and improve the image, the PR, and that kind of thing in those nations, in those places, all across Africa, Asia, and that kind of thing, especially in Arab nations. And I hope they'll all support Africans, Asians, and Arabs, which would be mostly Africans and Asians, and maybe people from all around the world, like Latin America and elsewhere, even other parts of Europe, obviously, and that kind of thing, all over the world, including Australasia, of course, and America itself, especially with the Italian diaspora. It would be interesting if, I suppose, supporting the club, but also supporting the club in terms of as a fan, but as a supporter, but also as an investor. So those two types of supporting. I made a mouthful of that, no, but anywho, number 18, again, I hope the club can do a lot of good for the community. Number 19, I dream that the current owner of Roma, who I think has been the owner for 4 or 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. Again, if anyone knows that, please let me know in the comments. Please let me and others know in the comments. I wonder if I was going to say this for point number 17, but I was conscious that I was the video is a bit too long, so I thought I'd wait for a bit longer. But he is in the film industry, the current owner, Dan Friedkin, and I was wondering if he could convince people like Hollywood stars, or maybe even like Bollywood and Hollywood stars, even coming together. But people involved in the film industry all around the world, maybe even to invest, like celebrities, basically, famous people, to invest and have shares in Roma, and people like Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie, and people like that, basically celebrities, actors, actresses, and whatnot. It'd be cool if they got interested in, the Americans, obviously, learning about soccer, hopefully if they invest in Roma, they'd be interested in soccer. Again, that could be something good to work with FIFA and UEFA with, because it'll be good for football or soccer, or whatever you call it. And hopefully their popularity will make other people support the club as well and increase the club's popularity. I'm sure there's another point I was going to say, but I've completely forgotten it. Also, I was going to say the owners of Wrexham, I would love for them to invest, maybe. Yeah, as Wrexham is in a different league and doesn't compete in Europe or whatever at the moment, and probably won't for a long time, to be honest. They could hopefully also invest in Roma, because it wouldn't break the rules of investing in more than one club, I don't think. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't break the rules, because the City Group, they own many different clubs. As long as they're not competing in the same competition, I believe that's acceptable. Another thing is, I would love for, I know this video's gone a bit longer than planned, as I say, about 5 minutes longer than planned, but another thing is, as part of like good causes, I would love for Roma to support with that extra investment they get, as well as buying better players and support. And producing good young players as well, academies and all that, academy players. I also hope that they will support Indigenous Africans and Australasians in software development, as well as STEM generally. And number 20, again, I'd love to know ideas on how they can get the best possible players if they get so much investment, but also develop the youth at the same time. I mean, good players, obviously, best possible players are an asset to the club because obviously people from around the world will be interested in seeing those players. Some people will support club just because they have someone like Messi or Ronaldo or Haaland or Mbappe or whoever. So that could attract a good fan base. So they're a great asset. Anyway, I'm out. Peace out.